Hey, it's your old pal Tom here on the Tom Gulley Show. Let me tell you about the Apollo 1 disaster, when the lives of 3 astronauts were tragically lost before man had ever set foot on the moon in the early days of our space program. Of course, this is our cold open. We do this, let people file into our chat room so we can be very interactive as the show proceeds. I'd like to acknowledge our good friend, the chef, who yesterday made an amazingly generous PayPal donation. It really helps our little show here, and we're so grateful for that. We really, really are. We're grateful for many things. We're grateful that it's no longer 9 degrees. We're grateful for very warm socks. We're grateful for so very, very many things. But mostly we're grateful for you, the viewer and or the listener, whether you're watching us on YouTube or listening to us in audio podcast form. We really appreciate it. We need it. We're not a show that just does one thing. We don't just do comic books or Marvel Universe movies or Cars or the Kardashians or things that are popular with people. We're all over the place. And the algorithm hates that for some reason. I mean, we are consistent in the fact that we're relatively schizophrenic as it involves our choice of topics here. And without the donations of people like the chef, well, it would just be much harder. And that's why today's show is brought to you by the cooking staff at the Skyline Club in Indianapolis, the highest altitude restaurant in the capital city of Indiana, serving the most delicious cuisine that you could possibly experience if, of course, you're a member of the Skyline Club or the guest of a member, because you have to be a member to get in there and have some vittles. Or like me, who was the guest of a member quite frequently. With all that being said, why don't we play a couple tunes here? If you're listening in audio podcast form, just fast forward through them if you don't like to listen to them. Although you should, because Leon Kennedy, our musical director, makes incredible songs for us. We're going to play a couple of those, and then let me tell you about the Apollo 1 disaster.
Early in the morning, daylight coming through. Coffee on the console, red lights next to blue. Got a voice that settles in, easy, calm and true. The man from Gulley,
Hey everybody, what's going on? What's hot? What's hip? What's happening? What is shaking? Let me tell you about the Apollo 1 disaster, the early days of America's space program and our rush to be the first to set foot on the moon against the Soviets, a tragedy that shocked the nation. We'll get into all of the details in just a little while, but if you could do me a favor and like, share, subscribe, retweet, notification bell, all those absolutely free things that you can do, they only cost a click to help our little show here with, of course, the algorithm, the almighty, all-powerful, all-knowing algorithm. Plus, then we do have super chats, memberships, gifted memberships. We have the PayPal. It's in our YouTube description. Our good friend, the chef, made an amazingly generous donation yesterday. Thank him for that very, very much. They really helped the show out. Then there's the TomGulleyShow.com. All of this stuff is in our YouTube description at our website. There's curated podcasts. All of our audio podcasts are on Podbean, Spotify, iHeart, Apple Podcasts, you name it. And our merchandise stores on the website, too. If you want a shirt, a hat, a mug, a cup, a clock, we got it all. It's all the shower curtain. Can't forget the shower curtain. Let's check in with our chat room very quickly. Ms. Ruby is here. Great to see her. She had a lot of great backup details in the chat yesterday. The chef is here. He's on the couch. Richard Harris online says, hey, Tom, do not recognize the name, but I have a feeling I know who that person is just because of what they're typing in here. I don't know specifically who they are, but they must be from somewhere I'm familiar with. Let's see. The chef says it's appropriate that you say about your show it's all over the place because the crew mentioned the other day, that's the crew that works at the Skyline Club in Indianapolis, that they like it, that it's about different topics. Finally, I'm finding my audience. Rock Music History Lessons 7401 says, have mercy. Awesome music. That's all from our musical director, Leon Kennedy. He is an amazing talent, and he makes, I think we've got maybe 20 songs at this point. Incidentally, our guest from yesterday, legendary broadcaster Hal Eisner, requested a copy of one of the songs. This is very rare. Terry Nee is here. It's really not a show unless Terry Nee is in the room. We will play the Terry Nee song at the end of the show for that reason. Positive Up Patriot is here. He's an OG. And Richard Harris online says, it's a food mystery. I have no idea what that means. But it sounds intriguing. If there's one thing I like, it's intriguing. It's intriguing. Let me tell you about Apollo 1 and the disaster surrounding it. Apollo 1 was originally designated AS-204. I'll explain that a little later. And was planned to be the first crewed mission of the Apollo program. There's the crew right there. I'll tell you who those fine men are in just a moment. It was planned to launch on February 21st, 1967, as the first low Earth orbital test of the Apollo Command and Service Module. However, the mission never flew. A cabin fire during a launch rehearsal at Cape Kennedy Air Force Launch Complex 34 on January 27th, just 3 weeks before the planned launch, killed all 3 crew members. Command pilot Gus Grissom, who you see on the left there, senior pilot Ed White, and pilot Roger B. Chaffee. All 3 of them killed, and the command module was also destroyed. The name Apollo 1, which was chosen by the crew, was made official by NASA in their honor after the fire. As I mentioned, AS-204 was to be the first crewed flight of the Apollo Command and Service Module to Earth orbit, launched on a Saturn IB rocket. And for those of you that aren't familiar with space travel, like I am, the command module is the sort of triangular module that you see when the old astronauts would parachute back to Earth. Okay? So this is what one of those looks like. It's very triangular. It's on the tip of the rocket, so to speak. And when man would set foot on the moon, that command module would remain in orbit around the moon. A lunar module would descend to the surface of the planet and then have to take off from the moon and dock with that command module to return to Earth. They were testing that, okay? Ground tracking, control facilities, and the performance of the Apollo Saturn launch assembly would have lasted up to 2 weeks in testing, depending on how the spacecraft performed. The command module for the flight, number 012, was built by North American Aviation and was designed before lunar orbit rendezvous landing strategy was chosen. Therefore, it didn't have the capability at the time of the testing to dock with the lunar module. Director of Flight Crew Operations, Deke Slayton. Deke Slayton. And if you imagine Deke Slayton, that's what Deke Slayton looks like. Doesn't he look like a Deke Slayton? He selected the first crew. And he chose as his crew Gus Grissom as command pilot. Now, you have to remember, if you've ever seen the movie The Right Stuff, and if you haven't, I recommend that you do. It's very good at detailing the early space program. Astronauts at this time in the United States were rock stars. You couldn't be anything more awesome than an astronaut because we were going into space. We had never done this before. We had gone into orbit around the Earth, but going to the moon, landing there, conducting experiments, getting back into a lunar module, docking and returning had never been done. It was the stuff of science fiction. So Gus Grissom here, who, by the way, is from Indiana. I've actually played soccer at Grissom Air Force Base. He was selected as the command pilot. Edward White was the senior pilot. And another guy by the name of Don Isley was designated the pilot, but Isley dislocated his shoulder twice in a weightlessness training aircraft and had to undergo surgery. So Deke Slayton replaced him with Roger Chaffee. NASA announced this crew selection March 21st, 1966, 11 months before the scheduled launch. That just shows you how much testing they were doing at the time. All of this stuff was brand new and had to be extensively tested. Not only because of the fact that they were going to the moon, but because all of this technology was somewhat proven, but largely unproven. In other words, theoretically it worked, but they didn't know for sure. So they had to test and see how all the parts responded to the rigors of the task that they had at hand. Keeping in mind also the amazing number of working parts, computer componentry, which was solid state at the time. a very big task. In October of 1966, NASA announced the flight would carry a small television camera to broadcast live from the command module. The camera would also be used to allow flight controllers to monitor the spacecraft's instrument panel in flight. So they'd be able to see not only what the people on board were doing, but they'd be able to see that instrument panel while the ship was in flight. Television cameras were carried aboard all crewed Apollo missions. The insignia for this particular mission, and if anyone's seen the movie Armageddon, you know how those patches are very important to astronauts. The insignia looked like this. Now, this is actually a pin for this particular mission. Every mission has its own unique insignia. Okay? Gus Grissom and his crew received approval in June of 1966 to design a mission patch with the name Apollo 1, though the approval was subsequently withdrawn pending a final decision on the mission designation, and they didn't resolve any of that until after this tragedy. The design's center depicts a command and service module flying over the southeastern United States, and that's important because Florida was the launch point, so that had to be prominent. The moon is seen in the distance, symbolic of the eventual goal of the Apollo program. A yellow border carries the mission and astronauts' names, with another border set with the stars and stripes trimmed in gold. And the crew, they designed this particular insignia with the artwork done by North American Aviation employee Alan Stevens. So, the Apollo Command and Service Module was much bigger and far more complex than any previously crewed spacecraft. In October of 1963, years and years and years before the scheduled launch, Joseph Shea was named Apollo Spacecraft Program Office Manager, responsible for managing the design and the construction of both the command module and the lunar module. Now, this is important, or maybe just foreshadowing. In a spacecraft review meeting held August 19th, 1966, a week before the command module was to be delivered, the crew expressed concern about the amount of flammable material, mainly nylon netting, and the space-age revolutionary substance known as Velcro. These flammable items were in the cabin, and they were there because astronauts and technicians found those two things very convenient for holding tools and equipment in place. Now, Shea gave the spacecraft a passing grade, and after the meeting, the crew gave him a portrait, a picture, if you will. This is the picture. It's the three ill-fated astronauts bowing their heads, clasped in prayer, with the module in front of them, and the inscription on the picture: "It isn't that we don't trust you, Joe, but this time we've decided to go over your head." Shea gave his staff orders to tell North American to remove the flammables from the cabin, but did not supervise this issue personally. Now, the command module was shipped to Kennedy Space Center in August of 1966, and it wasn't really complete 113 significant incomplete planned engineering changes had to be completed at Kennedy, and that wasn't all. An additional 623 engineering change orders were made and completed after delivery. Gus Grissom became so frustrated with the inability of the training simulator engineers to keep up with the changes that he took a lemon from a tree by his house and hung it on the simulator. The command and service modules were paired in the Kennedy Space Center altitude chamber in September, and combined system testing was performed. Altitude testing was performed first with an unmanned module and then with both the prime and the backup crews from October 10th through December 30th. During this testing, the environmental control unit in the command module was found to have a design flaw and was sent back to the manufacturer for changes and reworking. The returned environmental control unit then leaked water glycol coolant and had to be returned a second time. Also during this time, a propellant tank in another service module had ruptured during testing, prompting the removal from the Kennedy test chamber of the service modules so it could be tested for a tank problem, and those tests were negative. Once all the outstanding hardware problems had been fixed, the reassembled spacecraft completed a successful altitude chamber test with the backup crew on December 30th. The later accident investigation claimed at the post-test debriefing, the backup flight crew expressed their satisfaction with the condition and performance of the spacecraft, but that appears to directly contradict the account given in a 1994 book called Lost Moon, The Perilous Voyage of Apollo 13. James Lovell, renowned astronaut, said, "When the trio climbed out of the ship, the backup crew, Schirra made it clear, Wally Schirra, astronaut, made it clear he was not pleased with what he had seen, and he later warned Grissom and the manager, Shea, there's nothing wrong with this ship that I can point to, but it just makes me uncomfortable. Something about it just doesn't ring right." And he told Gus Grissom that he should get out of it at the very first sign of trouble. But after some successful altitude tests, the spacecraft was removed from the altitude chamber on January 3rd, 1967, and paired with its Saturn IB launch vehicle on Pad 34 on January 6th. Now, Gus Grissom, he spoke quite candidly about the subject of being an astronaut and the dangers that it involved in 1963. And I'll read you some quotes from Gus Grissom in just a second. Right now, we'll get to our chat room. I see people have been chatting. Terry Nee said, Eisner wanted my song. He didn't want your song. He wanted I'm Still On. The Guido Samurai is here. Good to see him. CIA said, good evening, Tom. These guys don't look like they didn't trust the process and maybe things got heated. Well, the process worked today, kind of. All the press is like, Arsenal's going to Wembley. Yeah, for the League Cup. Who cares? Guido Samurai says, those three dudes look like a Falcon Press book cover. They kind of do. CIA said, you must have been proud interviewing your grandson last night. If you ever need any Pulitzer Prize-winning questions again, don't hesitate to ask. Yes, CIA asked some outstanding questions yesterday in the chat. I very much appreciate that. They were outstanding. But back to our good friend and native Hoosier who went to outer space, Gus Grissom. He said in a February 1963 interview with NASA that You could take all the precautions in the world, but that doesn't eliminate risk. He said, an awful lot of people have devoted more effort than I can describe to make Project Mercury and its successors as safely as humanly possible, but we also recognize that there remains a great deal of risk, especially in initial operations, regardless of planning. You just can't forecast all of the things that could happen or when they could happen. I suppose that someday we're going to have a failure. In every other business, there are failures, and they're bound to happen sooner or later. And then Grissom was asked about the fear of potential catastrophe in a December 1966 interview, which would have been around a month before the eventual disaster. And he said, you sort of have to put that out of your mind. There's always a possibility that you can have a catastrophic failure, of course. This can happen on any flight. It can happen on the last one as well as the first one. So you just plan as best you can to take care of all these eventualities, and you get a well-trained crew, and you go fly. The launch simulation on the fateful day of January 27th, 1967, well, it was what we call a plugs out test. And that means that the module was not plugged into a power supply. Why? Well, the test was to determine whether the spacecraft would operate nominally on internal power while detached from all cables and power sources. Passing this test was essential to making their February 21st launch date. The test was also considered non-hazardous because neither the launch vehicle nor the spacecraft was loaded with fuel or cryogenics, and all pyrotechnic systems were disabled. And you may ask, what pyrotechnic systems are we talking about here? Those would be explosive bolts. When the command module went into space, the main hatch that they would be using upon splashdown, upon landing back in the ocean, upon returning to Earth, that had to be so tightly bolted in, and they had to be so sealed in that it would require explosive bolts that would literally blow the door off of that module. At 1 o'clock on January 27th, first Gus Grissom, then Chaffee, and then White entered the command module fully pressure suited and were strapped into their seats and hooked up to the spacecraft's oxygen and communication systems. Gus Grissom immediately noticed a strange odor in the air circulating through his suit, which he compared to sour buttermilk, and the simulated countdown was put on hold at 1:20, 20 minutes later, while air samples were taken. No cause of the odor could be found, and the countdown was resumed again at 2:42 p.m. The accident investigation later found this odor not related to the fire. 3 minutes after the count was resumed, the hatch installation was started. Now, the hatch consisted of 3 parts: a removable inner hatch, which stayed inside the cabin, a hinged outer hatch, which was part of the spacecraft's heat shield, and an outer hatch cover, which was part of the protective cover enveloping the entire command module to protect it from aerodynamic heating during launch and from launch escape rocket exhaust in the event of a launch abort. The boost hatch was cover was partially but not fully latched because the flexible boost protective cover was slightly distorted by some cabling that was running under it to provide the simulated internal power. The spacecraft's fuel cell was not loaded for this test. After the hatches were sealed, the air in the cabin was replaced with, and this is super important, pure oxygen at 16.7 pounds per square inch, which is 2 pounds per square inch higher than atmospheric pressure. That's the pressure you and I are experiencing right now. This is actually the backup crew taken in this photo, but this is sort of how they were situated inside the module. Movement by the astronauts was detected by the spacecraft's internal inertial measuring unit and the astronauts' biomedical sensors, and also indicated by increases in oxygen spacesuit flow. And sounds from Grissom's stuck-open microphone. Yeah, his microphone was stuck open. The stuck microphone was part of a problem with the communications loop connecting the crew, the operations and checkout building, and the Complex 34 blockhouse control room. The poor communications led Grissom to remark, "How are we going to get to the moon if we can't talk between 2 or 3 buildings?" And I'll play that for you later. I do have an audio recording of this incident that I'll be playing shortly. The simulated countdown was put on hold again at 5:40 p.m. So already they've been in these suits and in this module for 4 hours and 40 minutes, while attempts were made to troubleshoot the communications problem. All countdown functions up to the simulated internal power transfer had been successfully completed by 6:20 p.m., and at 6:30, the count remained on hold at T minus 10 minutes. The crew members were using the time to run through their checklist again when a momentary increase in AC bus 2 voltage occurred. 9 seconds later, one of the astronauts, and some listeners and laboratory analysis indicate it was Gus Grissom, started exclaiming. I think I'll go ahead and play this audio recording, and after I play it, I can go ahead and tell you exactly what was said, or at least what they believe was said. Here's that audio recording. First, you're going to hear Gus Grissom and talking about how can we talk to you from the moon if we can't talk between a few buildings. And then I'm going to fast forward to some other things. So there's that. Hopefully that's loud enough. That would be the crew as flames erupt inside the module. I'll play those again. It's a little difficult to hear what they're saying, so I'll play it once again. Let me try that one more time. I think I can make it a little louder for you. Let's see.
All right, crew, did we get verification? Can you egress at this time? Tom, were you able to hear him? Tom, get him RF. Gus, can you read us? Band leader? Can you get him out of this?
I don't know how well you could hear that, but the first thing you heard was what they believe to be Chaffee saying, "We've got a fire in the cockpit," after Grissom first says, "Flames." And then Chaffee says, "We've got a bad fire. Let's get out." And then we're burning up. The transmission lasted only 5 seconds and ended with a cry of pain. Some blockhouse witnesses said they saw white on the television monitors reaching for the inner hatch release handle as flames in the cabin spread from left to right. Let's get to some of your chats. Let's see here. No, crappy at life. Springsteen had nothing to do with this. Guido Samurai says, the really important question I have, though, is where did they relieve themselves? Well, that happens in their suits. Chef says, I am definitely not built to do anything like that. I'll feed them, but I'm not going up in space. Guido Samurai says, me either. That's why I obsess over weird catastrophic disasters, so when I can't find my keys or something, I don't crash out. In fact, one would be inclined to say that I am the opposite of everything it takes to be an astronaut. Ms. Ruby says, I didn't hear it. I can't hear anything. It's a little difficult to hear, and I don't know that it's the loudest recording in the world. Hopefully the second pass, I got it a little bit louder for you. Team Brittany says, hey, everyone, late to the party, but here. Always good to see Team Brittany. Miss Ruby said, good now, thanks. Team Brittany says, I would totally go up in space. CIA says, makes you wonder how Neil Armstrong called the White House on a landline. Yes. It is a horrifying recording. Yes. Rock Music History Lesson says you finally showed up, Team Brittany. Well, as has been said many times, no one's ever late to this show, ever. It's something that it's impossible to happen. No one can ever be late. The heat of the fire, fed by that pure oxygen inside the module, caused the pressure to rise to 29 pounds per square inch, much higher than the regular level, which ruptured the command module's inner wall at 6:31. Initial phases of the fire. Flames and gases then rushed outside the command module through open access panels to 2 levels of the pad service structure. The intense heat, dense smoke, and ineffective gas mask designed for toxic fumes rather than smoke hampered the ground crew's attempts to rescue the men. There were fears the command module had exploded or would soon, and that the fire might ignite the solid fuel rocket in the launch escape tower above the command module, which would have likely killed nearby ground personnel and possibly destroyed the entire pad. As the pressure was released, the rush of gases within the module caused flames to spread across the cabin, beginning the second phase of the fire. The third phase began when most of the oxygen was consumed and was replaced with atmospheric air, essentially quenching the fire, but causing high concentrations of carbon monoxide and heavy smoke to fill the cabin, and large amounts of soot to be deposited on surfaces as they cooled. It took 5 minutes for the pad workers to open all 3 hatch layers, and they couldn't drop the inner hatch to the cabin floor as intended, so they pushed it out of the way to one side. Although the cabin lights remained on, they were unable to see the astronauts through the dense smoke. As the smoke cleared, they found the bodies, but were not able to remove them. The fire had partly melted Grissom's and White's nylon spacesuits and the hoses connecting to them to the life support system. Grissom had removed his restraints and was lying on the floor of the spacecraft. White's restraints were burned through, and he was found lying sideways just below the hatch. It was determined that he had tried to open the hatch per the emergency procedure, but was not able to do so against the internal pressure. Chaffee was found strapped into his right-hand seat as procedure called for him to maintain communication until White opened the hatch. Because of the large strands of melted nylon fusing the astronauts to the cabin interior, removing the bodies took nearly 90 minutes. The bodies were only able to be removed after 7.5 hours from the time the incident took place, due to the gases and toxins present which prevented medical personnel from entering. Deke Slayton was possibly the first NASA official to examine the spacecraft's interior. His testimony contradicted the official report concerning the position of Grissom's body. Slayton said of Grissom and White's bodies, "It's very difficult for me to determine the exact relationship of these 2 bodies. They were sort of jumbled together, and I couldn't really tell which head even belonged to which body at that point. I guess the only thing that was real obvious is that both bodies were at the lower edge of the hatch. They were not in the seats. They were almost completely clear of the seat areas." Here's that hatch in question, by the way. Various people were assigned to an investigation team, and very thorough stereophotographic documentation of the command module's interior were taken. The board ordered the module's disassembly using procedures tested by taking apart other command modules, and they conducted a thorough investigation of every single part. The autopsy report determined that the primary cause of death for all 3 astronauts was cardiac arrest caused by high concentrations of carbon monoxide. Asphyxiation occurred after the fire melted the astronauts' suits and oxygen tubes, exposing them to the lethal atmosphere of the cabin. According to the investigation's board, Gus Grissom suffered third-degree burns on more than 1/3 of his body and his spacesuit was almost completely destroyed. White suffered third-degree burns on almost half of his body, and a quarter of his spacesuit had melted away. Chaffee suffered third-degree burns on almost a quarter of his body, and a small portion of his spacesuit was damaged. Why can't I talk today? Burns suffered by the crew were not believed to be major factors, and it was concluded that most of them had occurred after the men had already died. Now, the causes of the accident. The review board identified several major factors which combined to cause the fire and the astronaut's death. Number one, an ignition source most probably related to vulnerable wiring carrying a spacecraft's power and vulnerable plumbing carrying a combustible and corrosive coolant. Number two, a pure oxygen atmosphere at higher than atmospheric pressure. Number three, a cabin sealed with a hatch cover which could not be quickly removed at high pressure. Number four, an extensive distribution of combustible materials in the cabin. And lastly, inadequate emergency preparedness, rescue or medical assistance, and crew escape. And that likely was due to the fact that they did not consider this a hazardous mission because no fuel, no actual rocket fuel, was involved. As to the ignition source, the review board determined that the electrical power momentarily failed at 23:30, which would be, the amount of time after the test began, and found evidence of several electric arcs in the interior equipment. They were unable to conclusively identify a single ignition source. They determined that the fire most likely started near the floor in the lower left section of the cabin, close to the environmental control unit. It spread from the left wall of the cabin to the right, with the floor being affected only briefly. The board noted that a silver-plated copper wire running through an environmental control unit near the center couch had become stripped of its Teflon installation and abraded by repeated opening and closing of a small access door. This weak point in the wiring also ran near a junction of an ethylene glycol water cooling line that had been prone to leaks. Electrolysis of ethylene glycol solution with the silver anode of the wire was discovered at another place in the space program, and it was a hazard capable of causing violent exothermic reaction. The next thing is the pure oxygen atmosphere. The plugs out test had been run to simulate a launch procedure with the cabin pressurized with pure oxygen at that nominal launch level of 16 pounds a square inch. This is more than 5 times the 3 pounds a square inch partial pressure of oxygen in the atmosphere and provides an environment in which materials not normally considered flammable will be highly flammable and burst into flame. The high-pressure oxygen atmosphere was similar to that which had been used in successful Mercury and Gemini programs. The pressure before launch was deliberately greater than ambient in order to drive out the nitrogen-containing air. So they were using that pure oxygen to force out any regular air, which contains nitrogen, and replace it with pure oxygen, and also to be able to seal the door hatch cover. During the launch, the pressure would have been gradually reduced to an in-flight level of 5 pounds per square inch, providing sufficient oxygen for the astronauts to breathe while reducing the risk of fire. And that had already been successfully tested. This module had already been fully pressurized with oxygen, pure oxygen, 4 times for a total of 6 hours and 15 minutes. 2.5 hours longer than it had been during that plugs out test where they were just sitting there waiting for various errors to be corrected. The flammable materials in the cabin. The review board cited many types and classes of combustible material close to ignition sources. The NASA Crew Systems Department had installed 34 square feet of Velcro throughout the spacecraft, almost like carpeting. This Velcro was found to be flammable in a high-pressure, 100% oxygen environment. Astronaut Buzz Aldrin states in his 1989 book, Men from Earth, that the flammable material had been removed per the crew's August 19th complaints, but was replaced before August 26th delivery to Cape Kennedy. And then there was the hatch design. The inner hatch door used a plug door design sealed by higher pressure inside the cabin than outside. Emergency procedure called for Grissom to open the cabin vent valve first, allowing White to remove the cover, but Grissom was prevented from doing this because the valve was located to the left, behind the initial wall of flames. Also, while the system could easily vent the normal pressure, its flow capacity was utterly incapable of handling the rapid increase to 29 pounds a square inch caused by the intense heat of the fire. Now, the company that constructed the module, North American, had originally suggested that the hatch door open outward and use explosive bolts to blow the hatch in case of an emergency, as had been done in Project Mercury and as Gus Grissom himself had done. But the reason they didn't do that is that the hatch could accidentally open, as it had on Gus Grissom's Liberty Bell 7 flight. Before the fire, the Apollo astronauts had recommended changing the design to an outward opening hatch, and this was already slated for inclusion. According to Slayton's testimony before the House investigation of the accident, this was based on ease of exit for spacewalks at the end of the flight rather than for emergency exit. And as far as emergency preparedness, like I mentioned, the board noted that the test planners had failed to identify the test as hazardous. Emergency equipment like gas masks were inadequate to handle this type of fire, and that fire rescue and medical teams weren't even in attendance. Now, one of the biggest controversies, and I've talked about it quite a bit already. This, by the way, is a photo of the actual hatch, and I'll tell you a little story about it in just a moment. When designing the Mercury spacecraft, NASA had considered using nitrogen-oxygen mixture to reduce the fire risk near launch, but rejected it for a number of reasons. First, a pure oxygen atmosphere is comfortably breathable by humans, greatly at a low pressure, greatly reducing the pressure load on the spacecraft and the vacuum of space. Second, nitrogen used with the in-flight pressure reduction carried the risk of decompression sickness, which many people know as the bends. But the decision to eliminate the use of any gas but oxygen was criticized when there had been another serious accident. And there were a number of other oxygen, high oxygen incidents before this particular fire. There was one in 1962, another one in 1962 during some testing at the Navy's Aircrew Equipment Laboratory. In 1965, U.S. Navy divers Fred Jackson and John Yeomans were killed in a decompression chamber fire at the Experimental Diving Unit in Washington, D.C. The Apollo Environmental Control System experienced several accidents from 1964 to 1966 due to various hardware malfunctions. And several times, people just barely escaped with their lives. Also, incidents had also occurred in the Soviet space program with high oxygen, but due to the Soviet government's policy of secrecy, these were not disclosed until well after the Apollo 1 fire. Cosmonaut Valentin Bodarenko died on March 23, 1961, from burns sustained in a fire while participating in a 15-day endurance experiment in a high-oxygen isolation chamber. There was another Soviet accident 4 years later. And on January 31st, 1967, 4 days after the Apollo 1 fire, United States Air Force Airmen William F. Bartley Jr. and Richard G. Harmon were killed in a flash fire while tending laboratory rabbits in the two-man space environment simulator, a pure oxygen chamber at the School of Aerospace Medicine at Brooks Air Force Base. Like the Apollo 1 fire, the school fire was caused by an electrical spark in a pure oxygen environment. The widows of the Apollo 1 crew sent condolence letters to Bartley and Harmon's families. There was a huge amount of political fallout I won't get into, and a congressional investigation. It's voluminous. It really is. A meeting was called of the staff at Mission Control 3 days after the accident, and a speech was delivered which has subsequently become one of NASA's principles. Speaking of the errors and overall attitude surrounding the Apollo program before the accident, we were too gung-ho about the schedule, and we blocked out all the problems we saw each day in our work. Every element of the program was in trouble, and so are we. The team was reminded of the perils and the mercilessness of their endeavor, and there's a new requirement that every member of the team in Mission Control be tough and competent, requiring nothing less than perfection throughout NASA's programs. After the fire, the Apollo program was grounded, quite naturally, for review and design. The command module was found to be, by the way, this is the complete crew with some of the backup. This is the primary crew and the backup crew. The command module was found to be extremely hazardous and in some cases carelessly assembled. For example, a misplaced socket wrench was found in the cabin. It was decided that the remaining spacecraft would be used only for uncrewed Saturn V test flights. All crewed missions would use the next variation of spacecraft, to which many command module design changes were made. The cabin atmosphere at launch was adjusted to 60% oxygen, 40% nitrogen at sea level. And by the way, this mixture did not cause the decompression sickness. Nylon used in the spacesuits was replaced in the next variation of spacesuits with beta cloth, a non-flammable, highly melt-resistant fabric woven from fiberglass and coated with Teflon. The hatch was completely redesigned. Flammable materials in the cabin were replaced with self-extinguishing versions. Plumbing and wiring were covered with protective insulation. Aluminum tubing was replaced with stainless steel tubing that used brazed joints when possible. Thorough protocols were implemented for documenting spacecraft construction and maintenance. The astronauts' widows asked that Apollo 1 be reserved for their flight that their husbands never made. And on April 24, 1967, the Associate Administrator for Manned Spaceflight announced this change officially. AS-204 would forever be known as Apollo 1. The first manned Apollo Saturn flight failed on ground test. Even though 3 uncrewed Apollo missions, AS-201, 202, and 203, had previously occurred, only AS-201 and 202 carried spacecraft. Therefore, the next mission, the first uncrewed Saturn V test flight, would be designated as Apollo 4, with all subsequent flights numbered sequentially in the order flown. The first 3 flights would not be renumbered, and the names Apollo 2 and Apollo 3 would officially go unused. This particular medallion went with astronaut James DeWitt into space when he took his space mission in homage to the men who lost their lives in Apollo 1. There was a large hiatus. Astronauts weighed in on much of what was done. There's a number of memorials, really too many to list. This one here is on the pad at Launch Complex 34, and all that remains is the platform of that pad. This is another plaque that exists. By the way, that medallion was flown on Apollo 9 by James McDivitt, just to be 100% accurate. I can't even tell you the number of civic and other memorials for the 3 astronauts. The number of public schools, I could read the names for half an hour. 3 public schools in Huntsville, Alabama, Virgil Grissom High School and Ed White Middle School and Chaffee Elementary School, Ed White II Elementary E-STEM Magnet School in El Lago, Texas, near the Johnson Space Center. There are Grissom or Virgil I. Grissom middle schools in Mishawaka, Indiana, Sterling Heights, Michigan, Tinley Park, Illinois. There are Virgil Grissom elementary schools in Houston, Texas, Princeton, Iowa. I mean, I'm not going to read them all. There's just too many of them. This shocked the nation. And these men were really seen as heroes. 2 buildings on the campus of Purdue University in West Lafayette, Indiana, are named for Grissom and Chaffee, both Purdue alumni. Grissom Hall houses the School of Industrial Engineering and was home to the School of Aeronautics and Astronautics before it moved into the new Neil Armstrong Hall of Engineering. Chaffee Hall, constructed in 1965, is the administration complex of Maurice J. Zucrow Laboratories, where combustion, propulsion, gas dynamics, and related fields are studied. A tree for each astronaut was planted at NASA's Astronaut Memorial Grove at Johnson Space Center in Houston. In 1968, Bunker Hill Air Force Base near Peru, Indiana, was renamed Grissom Air Force Base. Now, the remains of the hatch. Whoops, wrong hatch. The Apollo 1 command module has never been on public display. After the accident, the spacecraft was removed and taken to Kennedy Space Center to facilitate the review board's disassembly in order to investigate the cause of the fire. When the investigation was complete, it was moved to the NASA Langley Research Center in Hampton, Virginia, and placed in a secured storage warehouse. On February 17, 2007, the parts of the command module were moved approximately 90 feet to a newer, environmentally controlled warehouse. Only a few weeks earlier, Gus Grissom's brother Lowell publicly suggested the command module be permanently entombed in the concrete remains of Launch Complex 34. However, on January 27, 2017, the 50th anniversary of the fire, NASA put the hatch from Apollo 1 on display at the Saturn V Rocket Center at Kennedy Space Center Visitors Complex. That complex also houses memorials that include parts of Challenger and Columbia, located in the Space Shuttle Atlantis exhibit. This is way, way, way long overdue, but we're excited about it, said Scott Grissom, Gus Grissom's older son. In popular culture, the accident and its aftermath are the subject of Episode 2 of Apollo 1 of the 1998 HBO miniseries From the Earth to the Moon. The mission and accident are covered in the 2015 ABC television series The Astronaut Wives Club, Episodes 8 and 9, and those are from the point of view of Gus Grissom's widow, Betty. The incident is the subject of the PBS track Fire in the Cockpit from their album in 2015, The Race for Space, and it's also featured in the 2018 movie First Man. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is really all I have to tell you about one of the most tragic incidents in the United States space program and part of the painful process of pioneering outer space. A sad, but some would say inevitable part of doing the impossible. Chef says, sorry, I've got to go. Summer's getting ready to call me. Everybody say good night, Gracie. Good night, Gracie. What else do we have here? Guido Samurai says, that was dark hearing that. Yes, very dark, says Team Brittany. How awful. Terry Nee being greeted. And Melva Bumpus is here saying space is fake. Got any proof of that? Just curious. If you did, you'd be famous. If you got any actual proof of that, don't you know? I think it's high time we did something here. Yeah, let's just do this real fast. Then I won't have to do it later. And if I can do it now instead of doing it later, that's what I'm going to do. Ladies and gentlemen, here's a song that needs no introduction.
Sits in the chat like he paid a fee. Shades indoors, who can he see? Acts the name, he points at me like, come on now, I'm Terry Nee. Head full funk, 0 degree. Smooth brain, confidence, guilt-free. You ask again, he shrugs carefree. Buddy, I'm Terry Nee, he's Terry Nee. Who's Terry Nee? He's Terry Nee. Who's Terry Nee? Say it once, say it twice with me. That's the whole damn song. Terry Nee.
that. Okay, I think we've heard enough of that. I think we've heard just about enough of that. For the love of Mike. All right, what else we got going on here? Oh, we know no more new things. Okay, so tomorrow's episode, I'm going to just warn you right now. You're going to have to buckle in. Tomorrow's episode, we will cover the entire life and career of Old Blue Eyes, the chairman of the board, Frank Sinatra, from the start to the finish. Okay? That's what we're doing tomorrow. Then on Thursday, the unsolved murder of television reporter Jennifer Servo. And it's another one, somebody knows something. And I think appropriate here on a day when Savannah Guthrie's mother is missing. Somebody knows something. Saturday, we will cover a little thing called the Hays Code, which regulated the content of motion pictures before the current rating system that we have now. It was really overly moral and weird, but it lasted for a long time. And then on Sunday, a groovy rockin' show, Sonny and Cher, The Lovin' Spoonful, Michael Landon, Sammy Davis Jr., Jerry and the Pacemaker. I mean, I could go down the list. Hullabaloo, 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 a cousin to Shindig. Guido Samurai says, you know I'll be there. Luck be a lady tonight. Anyway, that's what we've got coming up here on the Tom Gulley Show. Do me a favor, give us a like, share, subscribe, retweet, notification bell, all the free things you can do that don't cost you a penny. Our goal of any amount of money has not been met, but we'll trade those for subscriptions any day of the week and twice on Sunday. Guido Samurai says there was a ransom note that appeared in that lady's disappearance. I heard there was some form of it or something. I also heard there's some maybe blood found at the scene. I know that she's supposed to receive medication every 24 hours. She's not had that medication. And it's a weird situation because if you're going to abduct somebody, you would think almost de facto you would be doing it as a kidnapping and that you would be issuing a ransom note. That being said, if you kidnap someone for ransom, you're going to get caught. You're simply going to get caught because the ransom has to be delivered, exchanged, or electronically transferred. You're gonna get caught. And then at the same time, it strikes me as astronomically impossible or just bad luck of the worst kind that someone would accidentally abduct Savannah Guthrie's mother. Combine that with, if you were just randomly robbing a house, right? And you didn't know who was in it, why would you take them with you? Why would you do that? Particularly an 84-year-old woman. There's a lot of, what's going on here? What's going on here? Guido Samurai says, go laugh at TMZ. They have the note. Why would I laugh at him? I just saw the headline of his story. And it's weird, too, because all of the interviews and stuff that were done before today were saying, I don't know if there's a ransom. I don't know. I'm not laughing at anybody. I don't know what's going on. But that's the thing about ransom, is how you're going to get the ransom in this day and age with drones and everything else. You will see. Just go watch. Why? I believe you. What? You're acting like I'm saying you're wrong. I'm not saying you're wrong. I agreed. I saw a thing that said there was some sort of ransom note left. What's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? What in the What in the Sam Hill is wrong with you? Jeepers creepers. Let me see what we got here. Somebody just commented on the show that I did about Barney Miller. I loved WoHo and Fish. I got to respond to that. Anyway, that's our show for tonight. Guido Samurai says, no, I meant you will laugh at TMZ's delivery. Well, don't we always? And I shouldn't say that. I was on TMZ Live. When that show first started as an online-only show, I was on that show like 20 times. And I could make those guys laugh really easily, too. They'd be talking about something real serious, and I go, look, you're talking about an actress here. Actresses aren't really known for thinking. They live in their head. I got some quotes and stuff from my appearances on TMZ Live. And not only that, they sent me a T-shirt and a mug. I got a T-shirt and a mug. It was awesome. It was absolutely awesome. Anyway, I'm looking at that old clock on the wall over there. You know, I don't want to play one of the songs I played at the start. Ooh, I shouldn't have done that. I want to play a song different from one of the songs I played at the start. Let me see what I got here in the song bank. That's the point. Don't touch that dial. I think don't touch that. Well, it's the show's over now, and I'm still on. I'm not still on. That's the point. That doesn't. Tom's back. That makes no sense. Ooh, I could play the oldie. They call me Mr. Gulley. I could play Is That Him? Happy to be here. Already did that. Let me tell you about I think I'm going to have to play Is That Him? That's an up-tempo. We're going to go out up-tempo tonight, are we? All right, we'll go out up-tempo. Guido Samurai says, the dude had the paper with the informant's name on the back and didn't know. I'm going to have to look into all that here in a second. But before I do, God bless you, I am going to say that old clock on the wall says it's time for me to amscray. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. Tomorrow night, Frank Sinatra. Just saying. And with all that being said, I think the only thing left to say is, and I'm going to get better at talking. I've been doing a terrible job at reading my script. It's really bad. With all that being said, who'd have thought when you're on the air for 8 hours a day, you actually stay in practice? With all that being said, till next time, we'll see you next time.
Down in Texas, would he podcast with a smile? If he was in Ohio, could he fly? Behind his desk, wherever, can he see us through the screen? Would we be on the same football team? And when he comes around the stadium, fill up for it. They scream, is that him, Mr. Gulley? Is that Tom? It's Tom Gulley. When Tom drives to the city, all the pretty girls come about. Tom Gulley's airwaves a merciful shout. And when Tom parks his Jag in a space that's looking safe, all the men wish
Tom to go far, popping some pills for the man with the Letterman star. And if Tom came to your country,